Good morning, and a very happy spring to all of my favorite people out there. I know it's technically a few weeks away yet, but mentally, in my book, it is spring. I really have nothing at all to talk about today before we get into it, so in keeping with the theme of recent episodes, we will be diving into yet another period of European history and the evils that it bred. There is simply no shortage of shocking murder, brutal torture, and despicable people. Today, I bring you the Blood Countess. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come from History.com, the UK version of History.com, Ranker, and the others I will put down in the notes. According to History.com, the Renaissance was a vibrant period of European cultural, artistic, political, and economic, quote, rebirth following the Middle Ages. It's generally described as taking place from the 14th century to the 17th century. Some of the greatest thinkers, authors, statesmen, scientists, and artists in human history thrived during this era, while global exploration opened up new lands and cultures to the European commerce. The Renaissance is essentially credited with bridging the gap between the Middle Ages and modern-day civilization. For example, in 1450, the invention of the Gutenberg printing press allowed for improved communication throughout Europe and for ideas, good or bad, to spread more quickly. You've got the likes of Da Vinci, Shakespeare, all four Ninja Turtles, Michelangelo, Raphael, and the other two I don't know, and even Galileo. While many artists and thinkers, as they used to call them, used their talents to express new ideas, some Europeans took to the seas to learn more about the world around them. In a period known as the Age of Discovery, several important explorations were made. Voyagers launched expeditions to travel around the entirety of the globe. They discovered new shipping routes to the Americas, India, and the Far East, and explorers trekked across areas that had never been mapped before. But again, as artsy-fartsy as they were, they couldn't hide their love for pain. According to hiddenflorence.org, torture in Renaissance Italy was highly integrated into the judicial process at several steps. It was used not only on suspected criminals, but also on their accusers, and sometimes even on witnesses in investigations who were cagey with their information. There were strict rules around the use of torture, which judges frequently found loopholes around. For instance, it was never supposed to draw blood, hence applying fire to the bottom of the feet, nor was it meant to debilitate people permanently. Most of the torture used legally did not involve elaborate instruments like the Iron Maiden, but rather Italian judges relied on the, quote, fune or the strappato. This was a rope swung over a pulley, which was then bound to the prisoner's wrists behind their back. They were then lifted off the ground, their arms stretched out behind them. When they were given a sharp drop and caught before they landed, their shoulders dislocated. This caused extreme pain and severe bruising, but no permanent damage. The purpose of torture was not punishment, but to ensure truthfulness. There was some discomfort among judges with this idea, as their experience with torture made it clear to them that people would say almost anything under such extreme pressure, or might be unable to say anything at all. Those who tortured frequently generally became aware that, for the purpose of finding the truth, torture simply didn't work. And over the 17th century, it became more and more rare to use torture on anyone but very uncooperative suspects who, in the face of damning evidence, still refused to confess. Because it was highly regulated, torture also had its limits, and ordinary people had a surprising degree of legal literacy about when they could and could not be tortured. Some men arrived at their interrogations with doctor's notes exempting them from torture because of their bad backs. Women protested with pregnancy as not an excuse. I mean, you shouldn't be tortured if you're pregnant, but to avoid torture. Prisoners also argued that having been tortured the previous week, they could not be tortured again until the next week. Though they did not always strictly abide by these rules, judges were aware of them and essentially followed the guidelines, finding loopholes when and where they could. However, not everyone conducted their killing or torture legally. As of the times, still of the times, much of the conflict centered around religion and the expansion of it. The French Wars of Religion, which, a bit on the nose, don't you think, incited countless scenes of immorality, but one of the worst, known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, occurred in the summer of 1572. After a failed assassination, Charles IV approved a plan devised by his mother, Catherine, to eliminate their rivals. According to Britannica, shortly before dawn on August 24th, the bell of the Saint Germain Auxerrois began to began to ring, and the massacre began. The homes and shops of Huguenots were pillaged and their occupants brutally murdered. Many bodies were thrown into the river, and the bloodshed continued in Paris even after a royal order was issued on August 25th, the second day to stop the killing, and it would spread to many of the provinces. Estimates of the number that perished in these massacres, which lasted to the beginning of October, have varied from 2,000 all the way to 70,000. Modern writers today put the number at 3,000 in Paris alone. So yeah, we were taught about the Renaissance and its cultural influence in school, but not things like this, which are so much more interesting. Alrighty, let's get into it. Elizabeth Bathory, at first glance, was your normal, uppity member of a royal family. Born in Hungary on August 7th of 1560, her uncle was a king of Poland and her nephew a prince of Transylvania. Given her status, this story had almost been lost forever, and due to the secrecy of her family, much is left to rumor and up for debate. From a young age, Elizabeth was well educated and considered a beautiful young lady. Where she went wrong, it's hard to say. My best guess, it was either a learned behavior turned obsession, or a small obsession that was fed or ignored by wealthy and royal parents. Either way, even as a preteen, Elizabeth began showing overt cruelty to the family servants. 4 years later, in 1575, she married Count Nadasdy, a respected warrior, and the two were said to be happy together. Quote, the couple lorded over a vast network of castles, country houses, and palaces in Prague, Vienna, and other cities. At their country estates and inside the walls of their castles, they had the power of life and death over their servants and peasants. Elizabeth used her power to torture these servants and peasant girls in the most horrific and sadistic ways. For example, burning their genitals with a candle, biting them to death, ripping their mouths open with her own hands, burning them with heated metal rods and rivets, beating them with whips, clubs, or iron bars, cutting and stabbing them, throwing them naked into the snow and pouring freezing water over them, pouring boiling water on them, which tore away at their skin, putting them in barrels with spikes on the inside and rolling them down a hill, or closing them in a spiked iron maiden like garlic in a garlic press. End quote. And then on another site, I found this list. Yes, it continues. Some of Bathory's victims were covered with honey and left outside for insects to devour. During colder parts of the year, young women were stripped naked and forced into deadly ice baths. She would sometimes torture the girls by driving needles into their fingers and under their fingernails, or cutting their noses off, their lips off, whipping them with stinging nettles. She would bite their shoulders and their breasts, as well as burn the flesh, again, including some of the genitals. And this intimate nature of Elizabeth's attacks suggests somewhat of a sexual motivation, although it's impossible to know with any degree of certainty. If anything, she was creative. I will give her that. Some people say she would pick up new torture methods from her husband after his return from battle and then turn around and practice on her servants. But I just think she was bored and had a demented imagination. She went on to do this for years. The actual number of victims is unknown, but many sources speculate as many as 650 women and children were murdered by Elizabeth over a 35-year period. The reason she could do this for so long, aside from her royalty status, her victims were mainly servants, orphans, peasants, basically anyone deemed less than. You think our government doesn't care about the underprivileged people of our nation? These kings and queens really didn't give a crud. Her greed and enthusiasm would be her downfall, as with most serial killers. Elizabeth became bored with the poor victims or easy victims. Or maybe she started to run out, who knows. But in 1610, at the ripe age of 50, she started killing girls of noble families as well. Me, personally, I'd be a classy killer. I would have started with noble children and ended with noble children. Quote, when her castle was raided during the Christmas holidays of 1610, it was said that mutilated corpses of girls were found strewn all over the courtyard and in the basement of her tower. When the arresting party burst into her chambers, according to legend, she was found sitting on a stool, chewing on the mutilated, dying body of a girl before her. The Hungarian authorities ordered that Elizabeth be walled in for the rest of her life in this castle apartment with only a small open port for food. End quote. And there she remained until death. Elizabeth died after 4 years in isolation, with only those rotting corpses as company. Again, we were almost never aware of these atrocities at all. At all, Eli, at all. Her trial was held in secret in a small Slovakian town in 1611, and her infamously rich family paid to seal the record shut. There were no newspaper articles, no pamphlets, not a single written report revealed to the public. Even the servants she hadn't yet killed were beheaded and forgotten. And because of this, the legends of her brutality ran rampant. For example, biography.com states that she is often nicknamed the Blood Countess. Oh, they said the title of the movie. Since many depictions of Bathory often mention her bathing in the blood of virgin victims in an attempt to recapture her lost youth. However, that depraved action isn't backed up by any witness accounts, and the first mention of her bloodbaths came 100 years after her death, and therefore seems to be somewhat of an invention of a collective imagination. Her story lives on, like she's a hero, lives on through other arts of work as well. Many people reference Elizabeth as the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula, starring our fave, Gary Oldman. And that, my friends, is the story of Elizabeth Bathory, also known as the Blood Countess. To be honest, I think this might be the end of my European era. I've exhausted most of the ones I find interesting, but that, again, only means I haven't looked hard enough. Let's call it a break instead. I have yet to do the Dark Ages, I believe. As always, I hope you wonderful people enjoyed that terribly awful story, and thank you all again from the bottom of my heart for listening in today. Truly, truly appreciate it. Linger a bit after the music for an uplifting story today, and I will see you guys later. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you. Well, hello again. With all the nastiness in the world and all the nastiness within my past episodes, I was happy to come across something good in reference to our justice system that is so wonderfully flawed. Titled, Former Death Row Inmate Exonerated and Freed After Nearly 30 Years, written by Justine McDaniel of the Washington Post. Quote, a 54-year-old Philadelphia man who spent nearly 30 years in prison was exonerated and freed this week. The Philadelphia DA's office dropped all charges on Wednesday against Daniel Gwynn and said that he had been wrongfully convicted of murdering a woman named Marcia Smith in 1994. That was before I was born. He's been in prison 3 years longer than I've been alive for something he didn't do. Daniel Gwynn, who has maintained his innocence ever since his conviction and death sentence, was ordered by a judge to be released from state prison on Wednesday. It's good to be out, Gwynn told local reporters on Wednesday after leaving prison, smiling as he appeared between his lawyers. I'm going to go home and have a good meal with my family. Gwynn's case is among dozens that Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner has sought to revisit. 41 wrongfully convicted people have been exonerated under his administration. That's insane. I challenge myself and anyone else to find another DA that's working that hard right now. Gwynn's exoneration, quote, exemplifies an era of inexact and, at times, corrupt policing and prosecution that has broken trust with our communities to this day. Daniel returned home Wednesday night to eat a chicken dinner with his brother, cousins, aunt, and every other family that could attend, said Carl Schwartz, one of his attorneys. Daniel was arrested after the death of Marcia Smith, who was killed in an intentionally set fire on November 20th of 1994 in West Philadelphia. Authorities now say there was another plausible suspect in her murder, a man who was on trial for a different homicide at the time of her killing. Gwynn's trial relied on the testimony of 2 eyewitnesses who had already testified against the other man and had been threatened by him not to do so again. The DA's office said police and prosecutors at the time relied on that testimony and on a confession that they had coerced Gwynn into making. Krasner's office said Gwynn's rights had been violated at his trial and that police and prosecutors had failed to turn over the case files to Gwynn and his team, including key information about possible alternative suspects. Daniel Gwynn also didn't appear in a photo lineup that police said witnesses used to identify him, and he was never shown the photo arrays. In fact, the DA's office falsely maintained for decades that they did not exist until the current administration handed over the case files. Corruption. Then, Gwynn's lawyers discovered the witness's identification of him was, quote, made up from whole cloth, Schwartz said. It's hard to look at this prosecution and not come away with the conclusion that this is a fellow who is and was completely innocent, Schwartz said. What Mr. Gwynn was saying from day one was totally and completely true. The case files helped Gwynn raise the new claims that this week resulted in his freedom. He had spent years fighting for his innocence after being sentenced to death row, and in December of 2020, he'd been resentenced to life without parole. After that, his lawyers got access to the not new, but hidden case files. The wrongful conviction of Daniel Gwynn and his unjust imprisonment for nearly 3 decades is a cautionary tale of tunnel vision in policing and prosecution, Assistant DA David N. said in a statement. During nearly 3 decades in prison, Daniel Gwynn learned to paint and began working with the nonprofit Art for Justice, which supports and displays prisoners' artwork. In his profile on the group's website, Gwynn described his life in prison as, quote, sitting here trapped in a box where the days just tick away, the walls closing in on you like a trash compactor, crushing all hopes, all dreams, and your life. He wrote on the site that he was coerced by detectives into falsely confessing to Smith's murder while undergoing drug withdrawals, and he has documented for years his attempts to get the evidence held by prosecutors and to appeal his case. Through it all, he painted. It was a key part of my survival, he told reporters on Wednesday, because it was one way to speak about the injustice that was happening to me and also the pain that I was feeling. That's the end of the article there, but I, Eli, highly recommend visiting the website Art for Justice. I found it through Daniel's story, but there is so much more to the site. Aside from the exquisite art, they feature an array of articulate, kind-hearted, incarcerated individuals on death row convicted of crimes they promise they're innocent of. And their stories make me not only believe them, but feel them. Art for Justice isn't just taking any old person out of incarcerated individual that's claiming they're innocent. They're doing a deep dive into these cases and what went wrong, where it went wrong, and how they actually might be able to help them. I mean, my best friend and I spent 3 days in jail for weed gummies. Fuck South Dakota. Which was painful and truly sucked, yes. But I want to read y'all an excerpt from George Ivan Lopez, who has been on death row since June 19th of 1995. And just to get his little bit of experience, because I cannot speak on that at all. Quote, "My name is George Ivan Lopez, state ID number CZ-3198. I am currently on Pennsylvania's death row at SCI Phoenix for a crime I did not commit. I have been on death row since June 19, 1995, and a quarter century later, I'm still struggling to make it through each and every day. I will let my words carry you into a world of mental and daily struggles. Still, words alone will not describe the true nature of this man-made hell where the sun never shines. It is always gray, there are cries during the night, kind words are barely heard, sanity is constantly challenged, and the question of whether or not you wish to go on brings forth thoughts of suicide. This has been my life for over a quarter of a century." He goes on to describe in detail how brutal day to day, or really hour to hour, life is in solitary. "I now bring to your attention the reason why I have not lost my mind and still have my sanity. Art. Art can take me away from all the aforementioned dehumanization I've experienced for over 25 years. My art has brought me more than peace of mind. I was lucky enough to have found a true friend with the biggest heart and the goal to bring attention to the injustice and wrongful convictions of so many. Those friends are the Art for Justice members like Miss Anne Marie Kirk and Elaine Salon. All the members of the Art for Justice have shown me an unconditional friendship that inspires me to continue to fight against these injustices. Art has been the bridge to freedom and unconditional friendship. When I am drawing or painting, I don't think of the prison and the mental torture I've lived in, but rather it's an escape. I hope that my words can provide you with a small glimmer into my world on death row and how art has saved my sanity. I can now look at a piece of paper and draw a mental picture even before I paint it. By no means am I a great painter, but art sets me free." End quote. Hell yeah, George. I wish you absolute peace and comfort until your exoneration, my friend. Honestly, it might not be a bad idea to showcase a few more of these stories, shed some light on the incarcerated individuals who have been unduly targeted and convicted. Sadly, there are much too many of them. I saw that and I just felt like I should share a slice of it with you. Anyways, thank you all once again. Truly, truly appreciate each and every one of y'all's eardrums. And I will see you on Thursday. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you.